Zach, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just off of this last question. I was just curious with the training, if there are any people from the gender nonconforming community who were involved in making this training or interacted with the police officers during the training.
If that question is directed at my comments, then the answer to that is yes. When we developed the training program itself, the curriculum, we had people from the LGBT community involved. We had people from the ACLU involved. We had people from the Human Rights Commission involved. We had people from across the spectrum, as well as law enforcement. So it wasn't a law enforcement central developed course only with law enforcement officers. So we tried to make sure that concerns were addressed and brought forward in this class. And this is a evolving class because as you know, every day sometimes there's a different dynamic that occurs, an incident, whether we're talking about police involvement with the minority community or any other community, those dynamics change. And so we want to make sure that we update the program as we go along to reflect what's happening currently, so that officers are getting this firsthand, like I said, in that setting. So this program is getting great reviews, not only from the folks we brought in from the community, but also the law enforcement officers.
And the training that I have, I don't. It's not because I haven't tried. It's kind of what would I say? You know, I don't want to be seen. I'm looking for someone and asking, "Are you a transgender? Are you?" You know, it's kind of a little difficult and sensitive to do that because I want to do some training. But I have been working. Like I said, I have a sheriff's advisory team of folks from the community that we have these conversations of this training. And you know, Franklin Pierce University, and I'm proud to say I'm an alumni, is a powerhouse when it comes to this. And I'm working with actually one of the colleagues at Franklin Pierce, Simone Dorsey. I think it's the last. To help me put this safe zone training, this safe zone project training together to bring to the community. But understanding the sensitivity of and respecting people, it's kind of like I don't want to pull out. Hey, I'm looking for a person of this to help me prepare this. So I kind of like, as I walk through life, I guess, and I come across the right moments, I approach. So I don't know whether that's Zach. I don't know whether that answers your question, Zach, and just kind of being respectful, I guess, with everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
If no one else has any comments about this, I'm going to move on to the next question. So the next question has to do with establishing a team and recruit outside of New Hampshire, trying to find the best candidates to be officers. We kind of just wanted to follow up on this and ask if it has been successful. And we kind of understand too that one of the issues with recruiting people outside of the state is that a lot of people aren't used to, rural New Hampshire. So they often don't stay. So have you guys had any success in recruiting as of lately?
At the sheriff's office, I'll speak from my position. We're actively recruiting. We've are 2 and will be 3 vacancies come end of June. We'll have 3 vacancies, which is a big chunk for us. We use Indeed to spread the word. We use social media to help spread the word. And we do get people apply. We don't ask what their race is. We don't ask their age. We don't ask any identifying descriptors like that when we're doing the initial application. Some you can tell by maybe their name that they might be of a particular culture, but we don't kind of go into that part. So we don't know exactly who might be applying until we have a face-to-face with them. We are on our third trip through a recruiting process. The first two, I don't know whether I mentioned it before. The first one, we had about 40 people apply. Out of 40, 17 said they'll show up. Out of 17 that said they would show up, only 7 showed up, and 5 didn't make it, and the last 2 kind of washed out. So we're back to 0. The second time, nobody passed the PT test, and we gave them the opportunity to come back and do it. And now we're back at it with another group of candidates that looks more promising. 5 are still hanging in there, and we're hoping now the 5 that we get at least 2, maybe the 3, as we move forward. It's challenging for every police department because I'm not the only one trying to recruit people, and not just police. It's occupation in general out there that are trying to recruit, and probably the assistant commissioner can probably hear this from other police departments, how the challenges of trying to recruit just officers in general, and then if you want to try to be more diverse, it's even get more difficult. But we're trying. So.
Assistant Commissioner Edwards, did you want to jump in on the tail end of what Sheriff Rivera said?
Sure. The question of recruitment, whether we're recruiting out of state or in state, is a very challenging one. Currently, law enforcement is going through a transition, as you can imagine. And so when folks hear about law enforcement, we're really trying to educate the public on to be interested in becoming law enforcement officers. I can tell you, just a moment here, give me a moment here, this started about 9 years ago now. I was with a different agency at the time, and we put out a training program. We brought in minority officers from different parts of the country here to New Hampshire. We worked with Southern New Hampshire University to try to set up a training program and a recruitment program. At one point, I even reached out to historical Black colleges, HBCUs, to try to recruit people here to the state to work in law enforcement. It's very challenging because on the one hand, we want to make sure we hold law enforcement accountable and train officers to meet the community expectations. But like anything else, when an occupation is really demonized in such a way, it really hurts the recruiting efforts. So we're trying to educate, transform law enforcement at the same time and recruit at the same time. And one of the things that we're really looking at is to look at the diversity that's increasingly in New Hampshire every single year and work at the high school level, the college level, to try to expose more and more younger people to law enforcement, the values of those programs. And so many of the programs that have emerged from a group called SAG, like the Mirror Project and things like that, we're hoping that will inspire and motivate and encourage people to enter the field of law enforcement. But as the sheriff said, you could have an enormous recruiting pool of candidates and realize by the time you get to a place of setting someone before the final stage of being hired, you have 1 or 2 candidates left at best, because we want to maintain high standards in terms of the applicant's background, their ability to engage in the community, their ability to control themselves. And some of those things are demonstrated by past actions. Some of those things are teased out during the background phase. And you could actually start off with 100 applicants and end up with no one. And because we're trying to make sure we meet the community's expectation about policing, at the same time, we're trying to grow and expand and diversify the police department, law enforcement community as effectively as we can while meeting those community expectations.
So the demands for are getting tougher. You know, people are asking for more transparency, more accountability. They're asking for more training. There was a point there was discussion about they need to at least have a bachelor's degree and make it more difficult to kind of become a police officer. And right now, you could become a police officer at the age of 18 because there's no post high school education requirement. The chances are very limited that that will happen. So the community is demanding more preparation and more from us. That pool of applicants that we're getting, you know, is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And we will, no matter what the demands are, we will never kind of lower the bar for the minimum qualification that we have set to join a police department. So we have to be careful how we balance that, that we don't get to a point where it just becomes impossible to hire people, and it's becoming very difficult.
Coach Javier, do you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of answered it already. I was just going to ask whether you're reaching, like, whether you guys have thought about partnering with universities that are a little bit more diverse and that have criminal justice majors, and like when I was in high school, we had a military recruiter at our lunch like every day. Like he was present. So I guess my question is, like, how you know, do you guys do that kind of stuff to where you're creating a relationship with universities, criminal justice programs, and you're kind of saying like, hey, this is who we are, this is what we're about, you know, just be around.
Well, as I said before, we actually, when I was with a different agency, we actually took that approach with Southern New Hampshire University. Is one of the things that we will be doing here at the Department of Safety is trying to partner with universities around the state to really talk about some of these issues and to introduce young people into law enforcement. And I can tell you that we specifically targeted in that program at the time minority and women, trying to recruit them into law enforcement. And the class, the folks who showed up the class was predominantly young white men, and we gave them the same course, the same information, same encouragement. So it's like law enforcement is like any other career. You have to have an interest in it. You have to be introduced. You have to be educated about it, and it has to be something that you feel is important to you. Something that you want to pursue. So to your question, yes, I think we'll keep that effort up. None of this is going to change overnight. It requires persistent, hard work, and that's what we're prepared to do here at the Department of Safety.
And then kind of like on the topic of recruitment and background checks for officers, have you heard of the recent studies about how the polygraph test is not really accurate in determining whether people lie or not? And do you guys still use this method? And are you looking for other methods for background checks?
We
Well-
use the, I'm sorry,
No,
we
no.
use, we use a polygraph test for, most of our candidates. Sometimes, and I've read those studies and so on and so forth, but sometimes if somebody's not being truthful, they're not going to go on the polygraph. They're going to withdraw before it. Sometimes it's actually, indication that someone will be put on a polygraph to see whether the questions to see whether they've answered the questionnaire in the application process is truthful, whether the back and did they leave any information out from the background investigation? Do they want to add something? Do they want to expand on something before they get on the actual polygraph? You know, for the majority, a good majority will actually withdraw if they're not being truthful before they even go on it. So that's one of the reasons why we use it. It's not a, it's part of the whole process. You know, it's not, you lied, you're done. Okay, what happened here?
Does anyone else have any more comments on positives and negatives of the polygraph?
Well, let me suggest this: the polygraph examination, as the sheriff spoke of, is a tool and a process for vetting the background of an individual candidate. Clearly, there are some states that do not require a polygraph examination. Here in the state of New Hampshire, it's pretty routine for police departments to conduct polygraph examinations. There is no guarantee, with or without a polygraph examination, that an officer will be truthful during the entire time of his or her career. This is why we do evaluations, monitoring, early warning systems that law enforcement agencies have established. So there are many different ways to make sure that we have credible police officers on the job. That's what the public expects. But the polygraph examination is just one of those tools to help us screen out in the initial stage of an officer's career.
So continuing with background checks, how are you guys making sure that there is no bias in background checks? And what is something that you look for immediately and can know that it's a red flag? And do you think that any of these red flags can be re-examined for implicit bias?
Well, I think when you're conducting a background examination, a background check, you're filtering an awful lot of information, and the background examiner, typically speaking, is a police officer who has a number of years as a police officer and has gone through background investigative schools, has proven themselves to be someone who is trustworthy within the department, within the community, and that person is usually assigned to conduct background investigations. It's critically important that we get that right, because we want to make sure that we're treating all applicants fairly as they go through the process. So there is a review process, at least here in the Department of Safety. There's a background investigation. There is a supervisory review. There's ultimately the meeting with the colonel commissioners. So there is a process by which we make sure that the integrity and credibility of the background investigation is done appropriately. And you do your best to make sure that you don't have people who are biased on the job, because that sends the wrong message completely. And so we work hard to make sure those things do not happen.
Thank you.
We ask them, we ask our front, we ask them the question ourselves, as part of the hiring process. once they're given a kind of a conditional offer of employment, which means, you know, we can go a little bit more in depth. We do a social media, you know, background check to see where there's any indications there. And we look for signs that might indicate that there might be some flags, like you said, whether, you know, tattoos that might indicate something, or, you know, some mannerism, postings on social media that might question someone's biases. And we ask, and that's one of the questions that, again, that the polygraph will be asking during the polygraph as well. So there's a process, you know, we're not going to catch them all, you know, there are people that do get through, but we make a pretty attempt at trying to recognize potential flags and biases that we might pick up during the background and oral boards and the different phases of the hiring process. You know, I might get the package saying this guy or this person is being recommended for hiring, and I might just pick up something that in the package that might say, what about this little liner here? Did anyone kind of dig deeper into this one liner here? And we find out that, yep, there's a big skeleton behind the closet that we missed. So we try to kind of identify those before we hire someone. But, you know, sometimes, like, you know, Citizen Commission was saying, you know, it's not easy, it's a very difficult process, and we're not going to catch them all.
Thank you. So then our next question is basically, what specific aspects of the 3 categories of implicit bias, de-escalation, and ethics were you looking for when you went through the process of picking your training videos? How did you conclude that these were the most important topics?
That's something that's still being developed. I know the Academy has done Police Academy has done a lot of work in vetting and making sure that the training that they provide meets the expectations from the community. The minimum is 2 hours, so the Academy has focused on the 2 hours, call it 3 2s. But other departments and the Academy itself will be offering longer classes. With when something like this kind of hits the news or hits the public in general, hey, there's a need for implicit bias training, or there's a need for this. Believe it or not, we get bombarded by different organizations or nonprofits or individuals offering to provide de-escalation training or ethics training, or that I have no clue who they are. You know, all I get is email blasts, and they're portraying themselves up as experts in the field, and like I said, it's like a lot of spam of email that people have never heard of. So we look to make sure that the folks that we're using are vetted. Right now, personally, I'm talking from the Sheriff's Office. We're looking at training that's evidence-based and it's proven. We're kind of moving towards a company that's for science, that provides training that's based on is evidence-based. It's proven that it has a pretty strong reputation. Sometimes you have to pay a little bit more to get training like that, but we feel that this topic of de-escalation, ethics, and implicit bias needs to be conducted by professionals that are vetted, and I will trust the training that the Academy will put on to get us over the hump. But if I want to do a little bit more, you know, I need to kind of do that myself. And I know that there's known organizations out there that have been vetted, third-party vendors that the academy has vetted as well, to provide this training, that they feel comfortable that they're meeting the demands of the community and what the LEAC Commission has asked for. So that's our number one goal, that we make sure that we're just not having someone just put a curriculum together and here you go. It's got to be more than that.
Thank you. Our next question is, are you guys developing a standard that will show whether or not officers use the training? If not, how do you plan to hold them accountable for learning these skills and then applying them in the field? Oh, Morgan, do you have a question before we can do? Morgan, if you have your question, you can say it now, and then we can move on to the next question.
Yeah, I just had a quick one. I wanted to go back to the background checks. I was wondering if you could provide any specifics on things that would involve like a red flag for you guys. I know there's certain obvious things, like if they're doing illegal drugs or if they're doing something very obviously illegal in their social medias, but could you talk on some of the things that would immediately rule out a candidate other than the obvious?
We try to go back like 10 years of work history minimum, at least 5 references, give or take, you know, and there's a pretty intensive questionnaire that we put out. And I'm just going to throw this out. Somebody might said, when was the last time you smoked marijuana? And I said, when I visited to Colorado because it was legal. Okay. And that's how they answer it. Okay, well, when did you go to Colorado? Last week or 2 years ago? Oh, last week. So this is why you were applying to become a police officer? Yes. Okay, well, do you think that was the right thing to do? Knowing that you're trying to become a police officer, and here you are. It might be legal in Colorado. It's not legal in New Hampshire. It's not a federal, you know, so those are, it's kind of like, okay, what's the common sense decision making? It might not be an immediate disqualifier, but it's going to question that person's ability to do the job. Or okay, yes, when I was in college, I shoplifted. Okay, but what did you shoplift? A TV. Okay, well, how long ago was that? I just graduated. So things like that will start to kind of trigger flags as to the person's, you know, if we said, yeah, I shoplifted when I was 13 or 10 years ago, when I stole some candy or something like that, that might be a little different. So it's like when you start digging into like I mentioned, like you start digging into these background and picking these little flags that kind of pop up. So it kind of looking at the person's judgment. So that's kind of without getting into detailed cases that we've had, you know, that's kind of what I look for. And I know, and I've done my share. I know the assistant commissioner has done his share as well of backgrounds and hiring and firing as well. So we know what to look for when we look at these background and questionnaires and the packet that's provided to us.
The real challenge on backgrounds is you're constantly trying to find good people, just good people, and that's a very broad term, good people. But what we're looking for is people who have demonstrated prior to applying to become a police officer conduct that would lend itself to this profession. Many of the things that we're talking about tonight, some of the challenges that people are concerned about that face law enforcement, it starts with the hiring process and their training throughout their career. But the foundational work starts in the process of hiring and recruitment. And we have to pay close examination to their prior conduct. And that's is very wide. It is going to vary person to person. someone who has a very, very violent background would probably be eliminated from the process right off. If you have committed a felony, violent behavior, domestic violence, things like that, those are red flags, and you're right out of the program in most agencies. Now, every agency doesn't have the same hiring standard. Some have more rigorous than others, but the baseline is what you're referring to. And there's a certain standard that all police departments have to adhere to in the state of New Hampshire. If you're talking about our neighboring states and things like that, and that we can't really speak to that, but here in the state of New Hampshire, you're required to do a full background on someone, even if they've been in law enforcement 10 years and you go to another law enforcement agency. So we really try to keep monitoring those programs here at the Department of Safety. If you're promoted, you go through another criminal background check, whether you're going from trooper to sergeant. You'll go through another background screening for criminal behavior. That's every time a promotion takes place. So a lot of these things are in place to make sure that we're doing all we can to make sure that we have the very best people in our community serving as law enforcement officers. But it requires a lot of intensive vetting, repetitive vetting, and monitoring.
Thank you. Morgan, you can ask.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up question to that. So you said that whenever you get a promotion, then there would be a background check. So let's just say somebody's in the same position for 10 years. Do they have background checks during that time as well? And are those just as stringent as when you're hiring somebody new or when you're going for promotion?
No, the background checks are done when, that's by state law. The commission has the authority to do a background check when you're hired or you're being promoted. So that's when it occurs. Now, if you have been with the agency for a certain number of years, then a criminal background check is done. It's a criminal's records check, motor vehicle check, and it could be more intensive depending upon what we find.
Thank you.
I just want to follow up on what the assistant commissioner said. There's minimum standards that every police department has to meet for hiring, and like he said, some have stricter requirements, but there's the minimum that you have to meet. We are a small agency at the sheriff's office, and we're only 11 uniformed people versus almost 300 at the Department of Safety in uniform. So we don't know, when I promote, I know my people. I don't do a background check. I kind of like have a little oral board and so on and so forth, and promote within. So that's a little different because I think we spoke to this about a while. We hope that the community, if there's any misconduct from any of my deputies, they report it, because we need to know, so that way we can take appropriate action. As leaders of organizations, our expectation and assumption is that our guys are doing the right thing out on the road, and unless we're told different, we kind of go by that. We might be able to pick up some flags here and there on the quality of the report writing, the quality of how they interact with people in the staff, and we start to see a little some changes in their behavior that might trigger us to call them in and say, hey, we're a tight niche here. We can tell when somebody is off, what's going on, and let's talk, because whatever you do out there, you're the image of the sheriff's office, and want to make sure everything is okay. And that's probably easier with a smaller agency where, we're much tighter versus a larger agency where you might not see your folks frequently. So there's these different kind of, like I said, the way we do business might be a little different at my office versus the way the Department of Safety does with their staff. So it's not that we all do it the same, but we all have the same minimum standards for certification and maintaining certification within the state.
Thank you. So I'm just going to repeat the last question. Alex, do you have a question? You can go ahead.
I just wanted to know, like how Morgan was asking if you did continual background checks, if you also, when somebody was promoted, did another psychological test, because I know when officers, every 3 years they have to do a physical test, a physical eval. I was wondering if, like, when they get promoted and stuff, if a psych eval is done to be like, okay, are they mentally competent enough to complete this job, as well as like their marks show, okay, they'd make a good chief, but mentally, are they in the headspace to be able to run a department?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things that we're doing, we started a program here at Department of Safety for all, not just our sworn staff, but for all of our staff members. It's called the Wellness and Resiliency. It's really focused on mental health and law enforcement. And as you can well imagine, we want to make sure that officers are encouraged to come forward when they are struggling with mental health issues and mental health concerns, because certainly mental health plays a enormous role in many of the lives of people here and throughout the community. So the overall fitness of an officer is something we take a great degree of care to make sure is happening. And this new program is designed to do exactly that, so that we're not waiting for long periods of time, but we're going through a process that we actually create a atmosphere in the workplace where the stigma is not associated with mental health concerns. And I think that's going to make an enormous difference. We're also developing what we refer to as a early warning system, where we look for behavioral patterns, whether it's late reports, late to work, calling in sick, those type of things that gives us an indication that we may not be seeing anything, but it's an opportunity to have a conversation with that particular individual to find out what's going on. And many of those type of things are very helpful. We've started a peer-to-peer program as well. And so there are a lot of different things that we're doing here to address those concerns. But officers' mental health is something that we pay close attention to.
We're looking into it right now. We don't have anything in place, and I've had some conversation with some of the chiefs in Cheshire County. I created more of a regional type of approach because we have a lot of small departments in the county. So of creating some sort of peer support that is more regionalized, where each the PDs can kind of work with each other. There is no psychological requirements like the physical fitness. They have to make sure they pass a physical fitness every 3 years. But there has been some conversation about whether we should also have some sort of psychological kind of a check-in to make sure things are going okay. So often, just like they do with the PT test. I know there was some conversation about that. I'm not sure what the status of that is, but that's something that I have in the back of my mind as to how it can be implemented. There is some fundings that are becoming available for agencies to be able to create programs like that. That has to do with wellness and resiliency that I'm looking into. And again, when I look at it, I try to look at it as a how I can do this as a regional approach to help the smaller agencies around me. Because if you have a department of 3, it's pretty difficult to create a peer support group when there's only 3 of you. Or 4, or so if we do a little more regional, we can probably help each other. And I might not have the people that are right for the program, because you have to have the right people in it to provide that support. So I might have to look at someone outside that, you know, that people would feel comfortable checking in, and so on and so forth. So there's options out there. When I came to law enforcement, I was taught tough it up and keep on going. That's not the way it is now. So that's a change in the dynamics of our police. It's transitioning. So.
Thank you. If no one has anything else, we're going to move on to our next question, which is, are you developing a standard that will show whether or not your officers use the implicit bias or discrimination training? If not, how do you hold them accountable for learning these skills and applying them in the field?
From a training standpoint, we integrate the de-escalation techniques throughout that training cycle. That's one of the things that the Police Academy is starting to do very well, very effectively, is to make sure those skill sets are taught throughout the continuous operation of their training and they'll look for. As I mentioned earlier, we are developing to implement an early warning system that looks at many of these areas. Citizen complaints is one measurement. The supervisor's evaluations is another. Feedback from the community are things that we look at to make sure that those techniques are being used and they're going to implement it. And we practice those here in the workplace. Like one of the things I talked about earlier was procedural justice. We practice procedural justice in the workplace so that officers work in an environment where they feel respected, they feel their voices are heard, and that's reflected in their approach with the community. You know, you want to make sure that we're transparent with the officers. We want to make sure the officers are transparent with the transparency with the community. We want to make sure that they feel respected so that they practice respect in the community. And we want to make sure they've heard, they feel heard so that when they engage citizens, they know that that's one of the fundamental principles. People need to feel heard. They need to feel respected during that interaction. So those are things we look for, we train for, and we're consistent about that throughout the operations.
Thank you.
And on my end, you know, I guess like the assistant commissioner said is, you know, citizen reporting that misconduct and any complaints that come in indicating that. Fortunately enough, you know, I have a fairly decent group of folks. Our use of force has been in the single digits, and that's typically because of dealing with somebody who's been involuntarily admitted and having some sort of a mental health distress. Very rarely have we had any use of force that deals with an actual arrest. So we're practicing de-escalation to the best of abilities. But if it's happening and the community is not expressing those concerns, it can go unnoticed, and that's where problems begin. But as far as the training, we provide the training. They know what my expectations are. They know what the expectations of the community is. They know that we are being watched 24/7 with a microscope. That people are not afraid to record, come forward, question what we're doing, and that their conduct is imperative when they're out there. I have to believe in my folks that they are taking in the training, they're practicing the training, they're applying the training, and that's kind of where I kind of am at with that. Today we spend half of the department spend 6 hours learning about the ACE program, active chaotic events. I think that's agitated chaotic events, how to determine when somebody's having some sort of mental illness versus just actually resisting. When somebody's has dementia, or somebody's having excited delirium. So that's kind of helping my deputies understand the difference of when somebody might not be acting appropriately and how to deal with the situation, and to avoid at all possible the application of unnecessary force when dealing with it. So we're out there doing the training, trying to meet the demands from the community, but to understand what they're actually doing out there, and that it's not appropriate, it kind of has to come from the community.
Thank you. Elena, do you have a question?
Yeah, I know Sheriff Rivera kind of touched upon this, but when you say a lot, like you rely a lot on citizen reporting and it has to come from the community, is there like a system in place to ensure, like, if a citizen doesn't feel, I guess, the safest to, speak out and say, I think this officer conducted herself or himself in a unprofessional manner, and they're worried about anything, just like feeling safe about reporting? Has that been an issue? Do you have a system in place for that?
That's a very good question. It's, I have to have what you call it, hope that that both of my folks are doing the right thing, and that folks will report if they're not. While I understand that some people might be resistant to report any inappropriate behavior because they feel they're going to be retribution or something like that, it's unfortunate. I don't know if it's happening. It will be hard to know, because I see what they're reporting to me, what the reports say. If there's any contradictions to that, I would not know unless I call. I don't know, like, do I do a survey at the end of each car stop? Do I call you up and you're not going to answer the phone because I'm calling you at 5 o'clock in the afternoon? Hey, I noticed that you had an interaction with one of my deputies. How did that go? On a scale of 1 to 5, or so we don't do things like that. So I will have to kind of dig a little bit more into that. Maybe Eddie, maybe you can help me out here on this one. How do we kind of acknowledge that?
Well, there are a couple of things. I am, just for the audience information, I was recently appointed as Assistant Commissioner of the Department of Safety. I'm sorry. I was recently appointed the Commissioner of Safety of March 3rd. So I've been here in this position since March 3rd. And one of the things that that I know takes place is that we will take an anonymous complaint. So I know that the community sometimes it's a lot to ask someone. Some people feel very intimidated by the process. And so I think anonymous complaints are helpful in looking into an issue. Obviously, it helps if we can speak to a person, but people are free to submit anonymous written complaints. But the most effective way for us to make sure that we have accountability in the system and we're able to hold someone accountable is if we can speak to someone. But I also understand that can be intimidating for folks. So one of the things that we may want, we're going to have to do a better job at is educating the public
Mhm.
on their rights, educating the public on how to report. I think it's easier for us to say here to have this conversation tonight and said, you know, we encourage you to do so, but that may not be as easy as it's said. And so I think that's one of the things we certainly will be looking into, the most effective way to inform the public, educate the public on how to handle a situation, how to address it, you know, to put their fears at ease. So, and keep in mind, we also want to be fair to the officer. And so there's a balancing interest there, but we want to encourage citizens to be involved, to make sure that your voice is heard. And so we'll look for better ways to educate the public about those processes.
If I
I'm going to
may,
throw this back.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I'm going to throw this back at you. There's I consider a friend who is on this call and it's been driving all this time. And we've had some conversations, and you folks are the new generation. You know, I'm getting close to fully retiring, and you guys are going to be stepping into my role, hopefully in the future, and you're going to be the new generation coming into this profession. And one of the things that we kind of Pierre and I were talking about, how would you be part of it? So how would you be part of the solution? As about your question, Lena, how would you deal with that when, if you were as a new generation, what would your expectations would be of police and help make you feel more comfortable reporting it? Or what would you do if you were in my shoes as a new generation, deal with it? You know, so how could you help be part of that solution to making people more willing to come forward?
So I know someone, Morgan actually brought up the idea of having a website, or on your website, a place for people to kind of comment on if they had an interaction with the police officer and they felt it was not handled in the right way. And then she also wrote about a restorative justice meeting where you have a community meeting where community members can come forward. I know you talked a bit about this, but to have that meeting and ask them like exactly like, do you feel like safe when a police officer is around you, whether they're pulling you over or just like driving in the like roadway? Do you automatically like tighten up like your grip, or do you automatically kind of just like feel not as safe as you should when a police officer is present? And then kind of take that conversation further and like, okay, what exactly is it that you don't feel safe with? And I'll hand it off to Morgan because I know she was the one who brought up the idea, so I don't want to take credit for that at all.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt your conversation at all, so I just wanted to run it by Elena to make sure it didn't sound dumb. But I really like the idea. I've talked to Pierre on multiple occasions, and like his ideas with restorative justice and how to kind of make our own campus a safer place with our campus safety officers and things like that. But I don't see why it couldn't happen in the sense of the police officer, because not everything needs to be a situation where, you know, somebody gets fired or somebody loses their job because they maybe didn't react in the correct way. But maybe having a restorative justice session where if somebody felt like a police officer was being unfair or was if they felt unsafe in that situation, they could have that conversation in an environment where it's maybe moderated and controlled by someone else, and they can talk about like how your actions affect other people and then how the community's actions may also affect officers, so that we can have a better understanding with one another.
If I may jump in before we move on, one of the things that I wanted to mention too, with the LEACT Commission, one of the recommendations that was made and was further recommended by the governor, it happens to be number 16, but it's regarding reporting and an investigation of police misconduct, so any level of that. And the recommendation was that there would be a single entity, a single body that's an independent body of any particular police department, where people could come and lodge a complaint or make a report or however we want to phrase that, but it's a neutral body made up of law enforcement individuals. There would be some attorneys there, and there's a step-by-step process so that the public would understand. So the process would be made transparent so that the public would understand what that process is for lodging the complaint. And any officer that might have a complaint lodged against them would also understand what the process is for their due process rights. So regardless of the situation, you do have to make sure, and Sheriff Rivera and Assistant Commissioner Edwards have both stated this, that you want to make sure that the process is fair. So you want to make sure that the citizen feels like they can make this complaint without fear of reprisals, but you also want to make sure that the officer has an opportunity for their side of the story to be heard, and this neutral body would listen and then make those determinations, and then the process would move forward based on whatever those outcomes are. So that was a recommendation that was made by the LEACT Commission, a recommendation that was supported by the governor, and I believe this one was also put into legislation. I am unfortunately not up on all of them. There are quite a few Senate bills. One of them is SB 96. There was another one that was SB, I think it is 41, I believe. And there are a couple of other pieces of legislation that spoke to elements of the recommendations from the LEACT Commission and to help, because these are things that, although they're great ideas, either they take money or they will take money and legislative changes in order to make them happen. So the legislature was basically supportive of a lot of these recommendations, left them intact. Some were not so lucky, and there were some strange additions to the suggested legislation, but we're working through that now. So thank you.
Thank you.
And before we forget, I just want to make sure I tell you this, is you folks are the voice. You got to keep this momentum going that you have right now. You know, yeah, we're tired of Zoom meetings, but with Zoom meetings, we've been able to make connections that we have not made before, because people wouldn't want to travel. Oh, you want me to go to Franklin Pierce? That's 45-minute drive, you know. So Zoom has allowed actually some very amazing community engagement with people who are not engaged, even at the legislative level. So I'm going to encourage you not to let off the pedal, to keep this communications going. You are part of this criminal justice reform, and we need to hear your concerns to, so that we know exactly what it is that our communities need and want. I'm available. I know that the assistant commissioner will make himself available. I know the chief and range will make himself available. The lieutenant from the Troop C, you know, the area law enforcement will make themselves available if you ever want to meet and chat, because we realized that was extremely important. You are the, like I said, I keep saying it because you are the new generation that's coming up, and you're gonna hopefully some of you may jump into this career and and understand the issues that we face, and might have some suggestions. And policing the way it was 30, 40, 50 years ago is not the same as it is now, and it won't be the same 20, 30 years from now. So we need to keep this engagement going, and not let off the pedal.
Thank you. Alex, did you have a question?
It was kind of like an add-on to what like Elena and Morgan had been saying about, I don't know the possibility of this, but having the reports remain anonymous to the officers, so that if this is a serious complaint, the officer can't go take it out on the person that's complaining on them. But this body that's detached, that looks into the complaints, that's detached from the department, would be able to see who made it, but it would remain anonymous. So if it's like a complaint of they were rude to me, the chief can see, okay, someone made a complaint to this officer. I will go talk to this officer about the incident, but then they can see a compilation of all the complaints against this officer. That's public record. So they would be able to see, okay, this is a officer that may be a little, like, we need to watch out for. And then the body that talks to them and stuff can see, okay, this same person keeps making a complaint. Is this like an actual serious thing? But it would allow it so they are comfortable to make the complaint, but the officer wouldn't be able to take it out on them because it remains anonymous to the officers.
I'm sorry, but I can hear everybody, but I can't see everybody, and I have a black screen. So I need to figure that out. Did I lose everybody? Oh, you're back.
We can see and hear you.
Everything went black like for the past 15 seconds. I'm like, oh boy, I better not. Sorry. Just to Alexa, I heard what Alex, I heard about your question. There's got to be due process. You know, there's got to be an opportunity for an officer to kind of give a chance to explain what happened. And I understand what you're saying, that keeping it from the officer because they might not get back at the person. So it's a balancing act. You know, some of them we might just say, yeah, you know, keep it kind of neutral. Hey, you know, watch out how you're behaving out there. Sometimes you're coming across, you know, too you know, aggressive or being a little bit too rude, and without naming. But just like everything else, we want to know what the complaint was. What would I said? Maybe it was a misunderstanding, you know. So we got to balance that. And I know there might be situations where that might be okay to do, but just like I think it's our nature that when somebody says something about us, we want to find out who said it and why. They're wrong. This is what I meant, you know. So I you know, it's a balancing act, and I truly understand what you're trying to say.
Thank you. Before we get to our last question, I actually have a follow-up question for you guys. So if an officer is accused of implicit bias or discrimination or has several complaints on those issues, how are they held accountable then?
There's again, the sheriff's office is a little different than the regular police department. I'm an elected official. I get voted into office every 2 years. The deputies that work for me are appointed, and they're at will. The statute states that I'm responsible for the conduct. I'm personally responsible for the conduct of any of my deputies. So their behavior reflects on me. So I can, by statute, actually remove somebody, discharge their deputation at will. And I will tell you right now, if any of my deputies will engage in any conduct that I feel that it's clearly bias, and it's against my mission and respect for anyone because of their who they are, they're done. I have no ifs and buts about it, and they know that I do not tolerate it. And And there is not much that they can do because it's an appointment and that they're being discharged from that appointment. A police department would be a little bit more different because they have, Department of Labor laws that they need to follow, and it takes a bit more than just a comment to be discharged, as it happened with the Manchester Police Department. If you've seen some of the news. So I at least have that authority as sheriff and elected official that my deputies are appointed at my will, and I can take immediate action versus a police department who they're hired. So.
Thank you. Morgan, did you have a question?
No, I'm all set. Thank you, though.
All right, so our last question is, how do you address situations like ones that have recently happened involving police violence and police shootings? Do you see retraining as a necessary next step to ensure situations never happen like this in your department? And do you ever have a conversation about these issues after they happen with your officers?
Well, again, I think it's important to really reflect on what we've been talking about all night when it comes to some of the more recent events that have happened. Police officers are constantly being trained and reevaluated in these scenarios. As I said before, I know the course that I teach at the Police Academy, the 8-hour block of instructions on procedural justice. Many of these videos are gone through with new recruits. I know that some police departments, local police departments, are going over these videos with their officers. It's important that we have those conversations, and they do take place. What I would like to see, and one of the things I think we're working towards here, is to have a broader community discussion about those type of incidents. Now, we're fortunate in New Hampshire that we haven't experienced those direct type of events. And I think that's a reflection of the community's work as well as the law enforcement's work. I think this is where the community and law enforcement agencies must work closer together, so there's a deeper understanding and expectations. And I know the Training Academy provides that. I know many law enforcement leaders around the state are very concerned about those type of incidents. And so that's first and foremost on many of our minds, those type of incidents, and those are what we train to make sure doesn't happen. And that happens with, in some cases, verbal communication, de-escalation is part of every scenario that's built into a training program. Verbal communication, engagement, those type of things are very, very important, and we'll continue to do that and receive feedback and meet and have those conversations with law enforcement, but also with the community.
I echo what the City Commissioner just said, that this is ongoing. We do talk about the videos that we see. Some of them are obvious, where obvious police misconduct. Others, it takes a little bit more than just a 30-second clip to make a judgment. And so we're not quick to judge as to what happened here. So there's a lot of discussion as to, if you were in their shoes, what would you do? And things like that, and try to find any lessons that we can learn. It is a very dynamic event that's happening, and again, it's very easy to let the media or kind of make a prejudgment of the incident and maybe turn something around when it might not be. So we're careful when we have these discussions about how they're perceived, what can we learn from them, and because we were not the ones there. We were not, and the ones actually in the event, you know, what was their mental state, what actually happened here, you know, because we could find ourselves doing the same thing, you know, running after somebody and on a deadly force situation, and in a matter of less than a second, everything just turns. And also, obviously, we signed on the dotted line to do this, to protect and find ourselves in these situations from time to time. So as long as we, you know, respond to our training, are prepared to justify our actions, understanding that it's going to be reviewed from every single angle, and there's going to be some prejudgments, and we then need to be prepared for that. And like Assistant Commissioner said, we're fortunate enough that it does not happen, and well, it has happened, but it doesn't happen as often, you know, where we had officer-involved shootings. So, and I think when we do, we make sure that due process is done, cases are investigated, and investigations as to the officers' actions, whether they were justified or not, are investigated by Attorney General's office. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of, like I said, I had to double back on what the Commissioner said. You know, that's, we have a responsibility to our community.
Thank you. Elena, did you have a question?
Yeah, this is kind of completely separate, but I know it's gotten brought up a lot in this meeting, in our previous meeting. It's all about, it kind of all comes down to funding. And like, if you have money to do that, obviously we talked about whether it's trainings, implementing trainings at the police stations, or, you know, hiring a neutral body in order to conduct these kind of, I guess, investigations per se. What do you say to police officers, or not police officers, stations or agencies, when they don't have the funding? How do you expect them to kind of conduct these trainings? And then kind of off that, not to have such a complicated question, but is there anything that this council can do to kind of make it so that more funding is available for them to complete these things?
I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I was able to ask my commissioners and our county delegations to double my training budget. And the purpose behind that was to kind of become a kind of a regional training hub for the small departments who may not be able to let somebody go for training away for a week, you know, and develop some instructors to be able to bring that training back to the county, and then small departments can come and train with us. Funding is always a big issue, not just for training, for mental health treatment, for just about everything. Funding becomes the kind of something like the big wall that we all hit. We all have good intentions. We all want to move forward. We all want to do this and that. But then that wall just gets taller and taller and taller and hard to climb. Again, partnering up with institutions like yours, you know, to provide some training. You know, you have people in your organization and that might have the skill sets to help put some training together for us on the topics that we're talking about. That will be a benefit. That could be worked out in a partnership. And I know, you know, Ani will say the same thing, and Sean will say the same thing. We always say the same thing. When it comes to funding, that's one of our biggest hurdles, you know, because, you know, we have to be fiscally responsible. We're asking our taxpayers to, hey, we need this money to do this. That means that your property tax might go up, or your registration of your cars are going to go up, or something's going to go up to be able to accommodate those needs. So it's a balancing act that we play day in and day out, how to be responsible with funding, but at the same time push forward. We depend a lot on grants from the federal government to help us, and from the state to get funding for specific trainings or projects or whatever it might be, to not put the burden too much on the local taxes. But it's a competitive pool out there, because Ani wants money for her organization, I want money for mine, and then the assistant commissioner wants money for his troops. So we're all like kind of trying to pull.
Yeah, if I may jump in on that, just like the sheriff said, you know, all of it comes from taxes. So even if my agency or safety or labor, and I'm recognizing right now Jeremy Denley, he is here representing the New Hampshire Department of Labor. Whatever department it is, and if we are applying for federal grants, that's great. But the federal grant money is tax money also. So it could mean that my income taxes are increased, or my taxes my payroll taxes, my portion is increased, so that the federal government is collecting more money to then send it back out to the states. And that's a whole nother conversation, where there are donor states and smaller states like ours that receive more money than we send in. So that's a whole nother weighted conversation. But at the end of the day, that's what it is. And so the money that you collect, the tax revenue that you collect, it's what I pay for my home, my property taxes. And so all of the services that a state provides, it is primarily based on the tax revenue. So that's your teacher salaries, that's running the schools, that's heating the schools, that's paying the firefighters and the police officers, and my salary as well, and all of us here from the advisory council, because we're state employees, except for, you know, the sheriff is he's an employee sort of, but he's an elected official. It's a little different, but we're paid with those dollars. And so, you know, you want to attract the best and brightest for any level of state employment, but then you also have to look at the money that it costs to actually do the work. Hiring people and paying people is the most expensive part of the equation. So it is difficult to balance all of those. And I work on my actual budget for my agency, and it is challenging. You know, do I need more people? Absolutely. Do I request more people? I sure do. But, you know, the sheriff may need some items, and the civil rights unit that Sean Locke is responsible for and is the director of, he may also need to have another attorney that participates with that, or a paralegal or a legal secretary, because there are cases that have systemic issues and practice discriminatory behaviors, and he may need to have someone else to help bring these to court, or to work on agreements if that person or that business has to now be monitored for a period of time. And so we all need the money. There's only so many people putting in. So what does that look like? And how do you determine what thing is more important than the other when they're all extremely important and everyone is competing for the same dollars? That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where it's extremely difficult. And even if it's federal dollars, it's still coming from the same taxpayers. It just expands the pool because it's federal, but it's still tax revenue. So, and I don't know, to not beat a dead horse here, I don't know if Director Locke has anything to add, or if Jeremy Denley from the Labor Department has anything to add to this piece of the conversation as well.
So I just add a couple of things here. I mean, one thing that I think, you know, is important, and that I think New Hampshire does fairly well, is that while we try to kind of be as kind of frugal in handling things, we leverage the resources, particularly at the state level, fairly well. So we have, the Police Standards and Training Council, which is responsible for training all law enforcement officers in the state. So that's kind of a state level entity, making sure the police officer in Ringe is getting the same training as the police officer in Berlin, is the same training as a member of state police, at least at kind of that base level. So they're all receiving that training, and that kind of, I think, is a positive compared to some other states where the city may provide the training, or the town may be responsible for training, or the county may be responsible for training exclusively their officers. That we leverage that power at the state level, and we look for those ways we can be efficient. So where, like Ani and I, we work in the same kind of, what's that called, the same sandbox in terms of some of the work that we do, making sure that we don't step on each other's toes and say, okay, you can do this better than I can do that, so you should go ahead and do that work, and we can work together to leverage our resources in the best way possible. So some of that does come down to looking for those creative solutions that don't necessarily create a situation where we're going to the legislature, whether it be the state legislature, or going to federal agencies and asking for additional money. But like, those are always kind of creative solutions that we're on the lookout for, and best ways to achieve those results. But in terms of our council and the work it does as well, we do advocate with the governor's office for resources to kind of promote better law enforcement training, better law enforcement policies and practices. Our kind of first major report that we issued at the beginning of 2020 that covered about the first 2 years of the council's work made several recommendations in terms of how law enforcement can improve its practices, including agencies adopting the fair and impartial policing protocols that were implemented by the Department of the State Police in 2019. And so as a result of those recommendations, my office, the Attorney General's office, produces a law enforcement manual that during a recent update, we added a section on implicit bias and adoption of fair and impartial policing protocols, which that manual, it essentially sets the baseline for the expectations of law enforcement in the state. And so, those recommendations and the work that the council does, both the Governor's Advisory Council as well as the LEACT, Law Enforcement Accountability, Community and Transparency Commission, are taken seriously and really looked at, and we look at kind of delivering on those recommendations and references in the best way possible while being mindful of the cost that it may impose on the taxpayer.
Thank you. Jen McKillop, do you have a question?
You're muted.
Sorry, it's been a day. I think the funding, understanding state and federal funding as it pertains to the issues that we're passionate about is important. I just think from the lens, from the larger lens, understanding that sometimes these issues seem obviously, and they are extremely important to us, and we're passionate about them. When it comes to state funding and districts and the various representatives, sometimes in certain districts within the state, there are a lot of other issues, homelessness, some of those issues. And we wonder, well, why aren't we getting more funding for police, or why aren't we getting more funding for education? And I think it's important when you look at it from a larger lens, there may be other issues within those districts that are taking precedent. And unfortunately, it doesn't mean that the issues that we're passionate about are any less, but when it comes to state funding, there's a lot of disinvestment in general. So that's where these federal grants come into play. And, just continuing this dialogue and those grassroots efforts, I think are so important.
If no one has any more questions or comments, I'm going to let Elena or Zach finish it off. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, we just really want to reiterate just how much we appreciate you guys taking the time to meet with us. I think, like we said, it's all about, community and law enforcement agencies, whether that be with, New Hampshire Labor Department or the sheriff's office. I think it's really important that we have these conversations, and hopefully you gained as much as we did. So again, we just really want to thank you guys for your time, and we hope that we can continue having discussions like these and work in tandem to kind of present like our things that we're passionate about and things that we're curious about, because I know I learned a lot more, and I think this will help us in our efforts towards diversity and inclusion, and we hope that helps your efforts as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, thank you. And it would be our pleasure to continue the dialogue and to do more of these if that's something that's of interest to you all, but certainly to answer questions, to come up with creative solutions to a whole host of issues. There are a great many people that are a part of the Diversity and Inclusion Council that cover a variety of nonprofits, state agencies, law enforcement, and nonprofits. I said nonprofits that cover a wide variety of walks of life as well. And I think having an opportunity to dialogue will give you information that you might not have access to otherwise. It gives us an opportunity to see through, as Jen mentioned, a different lens, to look through your eyes. You know, you all are moving through your college years and preparing yourselves for whatever may come next for you. And if there's something that we can be a part of that exchange, that would be amazing. And we're here. We're an email away and happy to participate. It's been a pleasure. It's been great getting to know you all. And this has been really just a lot of fun. So thank you.
I too want to thank you for the opportunity, and I really appreciate the spirit in which your questions were presented and your leadership in this area. And thank you for taking the lead on many of these difficult topics and having the time to share with us tonight as well. It's not easy for you all studying and going through this process. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be heard and sharing your thoughts and concerns with us.
And I would like to make sure that Sean and Jeremy have an opportunity to share any final thoughts if they have any. Not putting you on the spot, but making sure you have an opportunity to share.
Sure. I just want to, thank all the college students who showed up. It's always nice to hear from the next generation, and I think you've given me a little hope. I work at the Department of Labor. If there's any labor specific questions you have, you can send them to the council and I will make sure to answer them to the best of my abilities. But, thank you so much for tonight. I think you have offered us a lot.
Yeah, I would just say thank you all again for hosting this, having us here. And if there's ever anything we can do to further the conversation, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.